everyone, Ripley Sellers with Bob's Watches. I'm here in the studio with Brandon for another episode of Vintage of the Week, where we pull aside one fantastic timepiece and share with you exactly why we love it. So, Brandon, we got a really special sub here today, but before a quick wrist check, you want to?
Sure.
What are you wearing today?
So I'm wearing a Sea Dweller, circa 2000, the 16600. I always forget this reference. And what about you?
Gorgeous watch. My Speedy, classic Speedy, 3572, sapphire crystal in back, has light up front.
Yeah, can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, it's classic. And speaking of classic, Rolex Submariner 5513.
Yeah.
And a gorgeous example. I mean, probably the 5513 is the quintessential vintage sub. When someone thinks vintage sub, they're probably thinking a no date, and usually it's the 5513 versus the 5512, and then within the 5513, quite a lot of variation.
Oh yeah. So yeah, what we have here is a beautiful 5513 with a matte dial, circa 1971, with a feet first dial. It just has this one checks all the boxes really. It has the original folded bracelet. It has the date stamp on the inside case back is 70, and the bracelet is 71. So it all really checks out. It's really nice. And not to mention that Lume color. What would you describe it as?
I mean, somewhere between a burnt sand and a pale papaya.
Wow, pale papaya.
Pale
I haven't
papaya,
heard that one before. That's pretty good.
sun-bleached mango. We can get really colorful there, but it is absolutely stunning and matches really well as well. Even on the luminous pip, I mean, that's usually the first thing to go, but
for sure.
What a clean example.
Yeah, speaking of the pip, that bezel is just killer. I really like that, well-preserved black bezel, super sharp ring. The font on this one's really nice. It's not super thick, but it's really nice.
Yeah, for me, bezels, it either looks great when it's just like this, like mint, or super washed out and aging. And, I don't love it as much in the middle, but I like the two polar extremes. When we get to, dead stock bezels, this is pretty close. But that kind of goes for the same watch, not just do all the numbers match, but this still has the original crown on it.
Yeah, the non-trip lock, which is great. I always love seeing that little detail. The trip lock obviously is a better crown, I guess, because of the advancement, but I just like the way that these crowns look without the dots under. It's pretty cool.
Oh, likewise. And it's also, I think, when we're talking about, rarity and surviving examples, it's a sub, it's a dive watch. The crown was usually the point where water breaches the case.
Exactly.
And so it is one of the parts that's most frequently replaced on the outside of a watch. Yeah. So, I mean, you see these more than I do. How many do you see that have at some point had a replacement crown?
Most of them really do. I mean, that was, like you just said, that's pretty much the routine service, just replace the crown, probably replace the crystal, a lot of times bezel, and everything else. And then another nice thing is this, we already said it, but the bracelet is killer on this one, It's got the original folded link, and this one's just in really nice condition. I feel like the bracelet, like the crown, is one of the first things to be changed in a service. And when you get the original folded, it's just great. And I've actually been wearing one of these lately, and they're just so nice and thin on the wrist.
The folded link as a whole is kind of like the forgotten Rolex Oyster Gen. Everyone talks about the vintage rivet links because it's kind of the first, and even Tudor does their
faux rivet, yeah.
Yeah, their faux rivet, kind of the reimagine of that style. And then obviously the 93150 with the solid external links in the hollowed center. They used those up until the early 2000s, so that's so much of a known quantity. But between them, we have this.
Yeah.
And and this example especially, so often you see the end links have been kind of crushed or bent, or that center link that goes into the end link is just decimated. This is in such good shape. And I mean, even just looking at the amount of stretch in it, this is not, my sub has more sag in the bracelet than this one.
Yeah, this clearly wasn't, I bet this wasn't used for diving. It probably wasn't really used that much overall. And one last detail on the bracelet we forgot to mention, it's got the error patented diver's extension, which, Rolex for not too long around this period, they spelled the word patented wrong, which I always get excited when one of those comes across my desk. It's just kind of how did they make that mistake? It's funny. But we all make mistakes, I guess.
Well, we do, and I mean, we're talking about blanket ways to how to identify a fake Rolex. If there's any misspellings or anything, it's usually, that's clearly not true if you go back far enough. And for a company that is celebrated for consistency above all else, how there's a countable number of instances where there's a definitive mistake.
Right.
This wasn't a stylistic choice. This wasn't something that they refined or made better. They misspelled the word patented. There's
Yeah.
So, and obviously corrected it quickly within a couple years at the absolute most. Those have been disappeared. Or like you said, bracelets often one of the first things to get replaced at routine service. So even the number that were produced originally versus that still exist today, let alone are still paired with their proper watch.
Yeah.
I mean, few and far between. Hence teeth.
Yeah, exactly. It did go into service, or at least it was lightly polished at least one time over the years. But at least they didn't, polish it down. They didn't really take away from the case shape.
No, this still has its bevels and everything.
Exactly. This is how we really like to find them, and it's getting harder and harder to come across these.
Well, and having all the numbers match up, anyone can fabricate something by kind of tracking down the parts and putting it all together. But to have it all where you've got we're within a couple years of the case back engraving to the clasp engraving where and that's exactly for the timeline of these. Rolex always says it takes over a year to make a watch.
Exactly.
And so it wasn't like on one day all the parts rolled out of the factory. This is about as close to having fully matching numbers as you're going to find on any watch.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. And, and I always, whenever I see a 5513, personally a 1680, the dates out, that's my favorite. But whenever I see a nice one like this, it always makes me question, like, maybe the no date is, a little cooler, or it's a little more, more symmetric. There's something to be said about the no date, but
I like both, and I don't like one categorically better than the other. I mean, I use the date so much, I need a date, and on certain, like the 16610 versus 14060, I prefer the date. But on the 5513 versus 1680, I'm probably gonna lean towards the 5513.
Yeah, that's fair.
9 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would still go 1680, but I guess the real thing is just have both, ideally.
And I think that's always the solution. Why choose one, have both? And then a lot of people do, you know what I mean? I think having a 5513 and having a 1680, especially if you've got like a red 1680 or
they're totally
different watches, and it's also having both within a collection is sort of nice because you can compare and contrast. They were produced alongside each other. It wasn't necessarily like it was a no date watch first and then it made the transition to be a date displaying model.
Right.
They produced them concurrently. Now there's more of a divide where the sub date is you can get in multiple different materials and all of that.
Different colors, I guess, with the green bezel now, or the Hulk before, or the 50th anniversary, whereas the no date's always like black on black. Black on black,
and it's been that way since literally the first Submariner that rolled out. And I think also relative value of this 5513 versus other 5513s you could buy. This, not cheap, it is quite a bit less than like a early gilt dial counterpart. So for those who want a vintage sub, want like the quintessential vintage sub, but aren't necessarily looking to pay that next tier of investment prices. I mean, this is mint as far as the condition you're getting, but don't have to pay that additional, almost arbitrary premium for these generational things like a gilt dial, a chapter ring, all of that. Well, we keep talking about this particular example being in exceptional condition and a great one to add to your collection. This example is for sale still, right? Like it's on the site.
It should have gone live, when this video's live. So yeah, go take a look at the listing and
yeah, gorgeous one. If you want this error bracelet and this beautiful 5513, hit the site and add it to your collection. Well, that about wraps up for this episode of Vintage of the Week. Absolutely gorgeous Rolex Submariner, reference 5513. Don't forget to tune in next time to see what watch we'll have for you then.
Yeah, thanks. See you next time.